Hi, guys. So, I am going to play Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy. As we are reading it together, I will be asking you questions and you will be responding on Nearpod. So, we are starting on page 196 and 197 of Wonders. And I'm going to go ahead and play the story. And as we go, you will get questions that pop up for you to answer. So, our genre for the week is realistic fiction. Our essential question is what kinds of challenges transform people? And we are reading What Happens When a Boy, our boy is Turner Buckminster, must face the challenge of the sea in order to save his newfound friend after a terrible accident. As we are reading, remember, what we are learning about today is how to find the theme of the story, Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy. Why is theme important? Theme is important because the theme of a story is important because a story's theme is part of the reason why the author wrote the story. The author has a message that he or she wants to share with their readers, and they use their story as a way to get that message across. How will you know when you have learned theme? You will know that you have learned the theme of the story because you will be able to fill in a graphic organizer with 3 details that support the theme or the message of the story. All right, let's go ahead and start listening.
Genre: realistic fiction. Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy, by Gary D. Schmidt. Illustrated by Yago. In the summer of 1911, 13-year-old Turner Buckminster and his parents leave the busy city of Boston and settle in a small town on the coast of Maine, where Turner's father is the new minister. Turner feels lost until he meets a girl named Lizzie Bright. Lizzie lives on nearby Malaga Island in a community founded by former enslaved African Americans. She helps Turner learn about the sea and its inhabitants. Every morning, Turner walks to the shore, where the New Meadows River meets the ocean, and where Lizzie waits for him. He begins to call these exquisite days of summer blue days, because of the beautiful blue sky that blends into the indigo-colored ocean horizon. But then one day a dreadful accident occurs, and Turner must use everything Lizzie has taught him to save his friend. Every morning the sea breeze bustled up and called Turner until he followed it to the shore, where Lizzie waited for him, her bucket half full of clams. Blue days, as the tide washed away the twin footprints Lizzie and Turner left along the beach. Blue days, as they walked among the sharp-edged mussels, prying open their blue-black shells to tickle their orange tendons. Blue days, as they sprinted against the sea breeze and chased the gulls until Turner finally touched a tail feather. Blue days, as they dangled their legs over the granite ledges and felt the gigantic continent behind them. And it was on one of their climbs, on one of those blue days that was gushing into a bright copper, that Turner reached up and put his hand on something wet and clammy and slimy and moving, recoiled with a yelp, and startled Lizzie beneath him. She tried, but could not quite find her balance, and fell down to the mud flats, striking her head on a granite outcropping just before she dropped to the bottom. "Lizzie!" Turner cried, half falling himself until he was beside her, his hands under her head, startled by how quickly they were covered with her blood. "Lizzie!" "Don't you get—" she said, then stopped. "Whatever you do," she started again, "don't get blood on that shirt." She put her hand up to her forehead, and it shook. "You better get me back to my granddaddy. I'm so dizzy." She tried to stand up, Turner behind and holding on to her, but her feet didn't go where she wanted them to, and Turner had to steer her as she swayed and zigzagged to the dory. The blood leaked through her fingers and dripped to the sand. Almost there. I can hardly see, she said slowly, and Turner's stomach tightened. When they reached the boat, Lizzie stood there stupidly, not quite sure what to do. Climb in, said Turner, but he had to lift her front leg for her, and once she was in, she fell into a loose heap in the bow, and her eyes closed. Turner figured that the more awake Lizzie was, the better she would be, so he hollered at her, and when she did not open her eyes, he splashed seawater into her face until she sputtered and opened them. Keep them open, or I'll splash you again.
Okay, remember, he is not splashing water at her to be mean. He's trying to keep her awake. Keep that in mind.
If you splash me again, I won't help you get that blood off your shirt. Just keep your eyes open, Lizzie Bright. He shoved the dory out stern first into the new meadows and noticed how choppy it had become, with even some whitecaps tumbling between him and Malaga.
The dory is the little boat that they had. That's what they call them, is the dory.
He settled himself, took the 2 oars, and fixed them to the oarlocks, then dipped them in, and was surprised at how the water took them, almost sweeping one oar under the boat, and the other out of his hand. He imagined watching the oar drifting away, out to the open bay, and wondered how he would ever get across if that happened. He kept turning around to look at Lizzie. Are your eyes open? He called. Lizzie, open your eyes. Open your dang eyes. A minister's son. A minister's son shouldn't say dang. Turner's stomach grew tighter and tighter with the slow sprawl of her words. Keep your eyes open, he said, and bent back to the oars, trying to get the stern steady and the bow pointed to the island. It was harder than he had realized, much harder. The water was running out against him, and every whitecap that struck him broadside sent water into the bottom of the boat. The dory felt clumsy, and it would not keep its nose where it was supposed to go. Soon he was no longer trying to point it.
I want to find you guys a picture of a dory where you guys can see them. So here's a little dory boat. I just wanted you guys to have a little picture. As you guys are reading and listening, you can kind of imagine one of these pictures. Actually, this is a good one right here because it said it runs through Maine. So this would be very similar to a boat that they might be on.
At the island's north end, but at its south end, and with every stroke in toward the island, he felt the boat drifting down and away from it. He began to row with a frantic energy, the oars chewing raggedly at the water. But the waves kept turning the bow from Malaga, and the oars kept slipping out of the locks. And by the time he had gotten them back in, the boat had skewed all around and was slipping up and down in the troughs. Head the dory, into the waves, said Lizzie feebly. Turner did not reply. He was watching the granite ledges slip past, the pines above them bending with the wind out to sea. Into the waves, said Lizzie again. He turned around. I know, Lizzie, I'll get it. Keep your eyes open, both of them. They were now well away from Malaga and heading stern first down the new meadows. The waves chopped briskly as they rushed out to the bay and to the sea beyond. And Turner gave up any notion of trying to make it back to the island. Instead, he turned the bow against the running tide to maneuver the dory in close to the mainland, where he might find some mud flats to run up to. But now,
let's find a picture of mud flats. Here we go. So it looks like he is trying to run up on to like the mud and the dirt. So if you guys have been up to like Pismo, this is what maybe you've seen something like this. He's trying to run up. So not quite out of the water, and they're kind of just in that little muddy patch of the water that would keep them from moving around anymore.
The ledges came right down to the new meadows, and there were no open mud flats. The water was choppier and close, and twice he struck a stone ridge just beneath the surface. The second time so hard, he was afraid it might bash in the boards. He moved the dory out farther again. Lizzie, who had felt the bashing just beneath her, raised her head. "You missed the island." "Yes." "You missed the island. How could you miss the island?" "The tide's too strong. It's taking us out with it." Lizzie put her hand to her head, and Turner thought she might be sick. "I'm going to fall asleep," she murmured. "You can't fall asleep, Lizzie. You've got to keep your eyes open. When you reach the point, when you reach Bald Head." "When I reach Bald Head," Turner repeated. "The tide will slack some. You can ground. The tide will slack some." Then Lizzie was quiet. Turner looked ahead and saw the rock ledges streaming past and the shore bending away. He moved the dory in closer to the land and stopped rowing altogether except to keep the bow into the waves. His arms felt drained, and he wasn't sure he could make them do what he wanted them to do when the slack water came. But he waited and watched, hollering back to Lizzie now and again to be sure she stayed awake. But she wasn't hollering back. The copper of the sky had deepened into a dark red, and the dark red was now deepening into the purple of early night. When Turner looked over his shoulder to the east, more than a few stars had already yawned themselves awake and were stretching to begin their run. On the ledges above him there passed a farmhouse, then another, and still another, where yellow lamps were glowing out the windows. He felt the air cooling quickly. Then the rhythm of the waves changed. In a moment they had lost their choppiness, and had lengthened into long swells that came slow and syrupy. The boat smoothed out, and it was easy to keep the bow to the low stretches of water that swiped at the dory's nose. Turner thought immediately that they must be at the point. When he looked at the shore, it was hard to tell whether it was bending away or whether it just got lost in the gathering darkness. But he turned into it anyway, rowing with all the might he could summon in his drained arms, pushing back with his legs, and grunting with each pull, not even calling to Lizzie, because he could not speak and pull at the same time. He felt the dory skim across the swells, cutting through their rhythm, and figured that finally, he was setting their course.
So what do we think? Do we think Turner is going to gain control of the dory? Just wondering. Let's see.
As the purple of the sky spread all the way across to the west, he rowed. As more and more stars roused themselves, he rowed. And as the wind picked itself up and wrestled with the tops of the swells, he rowed. He rowed until he realized he had missed the point, and they were well out into the bay. And then he stopped. Now the purple spread from horizon to horizon, and the stars that had clustered in the east were fading with the early light of the rising moon. The swells lengthened even more, so that the dory rocked up and down as gently as ever it might. And if it had not been for the farmhouse lights on the shoreline, Turner would hardly have been able to tell that the dory was moving at all. He was not afraid, and was surprised to find that he wasn't. As long as he could keep the shoreline lights from dipping under the waves, he knew that he was in sight of shore. And he knew that the tide would have to stop flowing sometime and head back up the new meadows. Already he could sense it weakening when he dipped the oars into the water. He could even make some headway into shore before his tired arms gave out and he was pulled back to where he had started. He was thirsty and more than a little bit hungry, but without the panic of hopelessness. If only Lizzie were awake. This would be something out of a dream, something that, had he known he might do it, he would have longed for. But when he looked at Lizzie, there was a sickening tug down deep in his gut. It was getting harder and harder to get her to keep her eyes even half open. And though the bleeding from the wound had stopped, she seemed to be fading from him. He shipped the oars and turned to face her. "Lizzie! Lizzie Bright!" He shook her by the knee. "Lizzie! We almost there?" "Almost." "Turner?" she asked. "Yes." "You ever row a boat before?" Turner hesitated. He wondered if being on the swan boats in the public garden counted, and figured that probably it didn't. "Not hardly." "Ever in your whole life?" "Not until today." "I thought so." "Keep your eyes open, Lizzie." Turner went back to the oars, turned the bow toward shore, it wasn't hard in the long swells, and tried to row in again. He kept his strokes slow and long, and though when he finally turned his head, it seemed the shore lights were not much nearer, they were a little nearer, and he held to the pace until his muscles buckled, and he shipped the oars and watched the lights very slowly withdraw again. And that was when he first heard the water ripping near him. The moon had roused herself fully out of the sea, and was tossing her silver bedclothes all around. Turner was sure that in that light he should have been able to make out any rocks, but he couldn't see anything breaking the surface. He listened, not moving, and heard the ripping again, but behind him this time, and closer to shore and ahead of him, one after another. In the moonlight he saw a silver spray burst up into the air, a shower of diamond dust, then another, and another almost beside the boat, so that he could feel the spray of it against his face. And the dory rocked to the rhythm of the new swells as a great presence broke the surface of the sea, and Turner knew or felt the vastness of Wales. Now he almost did panic. One could come right up beneath them and turn the dory over as easily as a pine chip, and he would be floating in the sea, holding on to the upturned dory, holding on to Lizzie, who he was sure could not hold on by herself. That is, he would be holding on to her if he could find her after they capsized. But though the dory rocked back and forth with the swell of them, the whales never came.
Okay, we're almost done. I know it's a long story. We have about 4 pages left.
So close that the boat might capsize. Turner heard them ripping the surface all around him, and felt the diamond spray sprinkled down on him in the moonlight like a benediction. He knew he was in the middle of something much larger than himself, and not just larger in size. It was like being in the middle of a swirling universe that could swamp him in a moment, but had no desire to. He might put out his hand into the maelstrom and become part of it. But he didn't put his hand out yet, because as he watched, a whale 5 times as long as the dory surfaced, and rode quietly alongside him in the smooth swells. Turner could not breathe. The whale flipped its tail up a bit and began to roll from side to side, a great gargantuan roll, like the roll of the globe, side to side, until it could slap the swells with the length of its flippers, gleaming silver white in the moonlight. Turner held on to the sides of the dory, and rolled side to side with it, with this great vastness that had swum past the mountains and valleys of the sea. Together, they rocked, and Turner wished that the rocking would never stop, that there would always be this moonlit moment. But slowly the whale did stop rocking, and the seas calmed, and the rhythm of the swells took hold again. Quietly, more afraid than not, Turner slipped the oars into the water, and with gentle strokes, keeping the oars beneath the surface all the time, he eased the dory forward, hoping that the whale would wait on the surface. It did. And so Turner reached the whale's eye, and they looked at each other. They looked at each other a long time, two souls rolling on the sea under the silvery moon, peering into each other's eyes. Turner wished with a desire greater than anything he had ever desired, that he might understand what it was in the eye of the whale that shivered his soul. He stretched his hand out across the side of the dory, and reached over as far as he could without tipping the boat. But the whale kept a space of dark water between them, and they did not touch. Then, slowly, the whale sank, the water closing quietly along its black and white back, and the whales were gone. "Lizzie," whispered Turner. There was no answer. He reached back and shook her leg, then her shoulder. Finally he scooped up water and splashed it into her face, since salt water will do for everything. "Lizzie, you've got to open your eyes." "They're open," she said. "You splashed me." "Lizzie, there were whales." She didn't answer. "Lizzie, whales." "You touch one?" "Tried." She took a deep breath. "They only let you touch them if you understand what they're saying." "What do they say?" "You'll know when they let you touch them." "Home yet?" He set to rowing again. He did not know how long they had been with the whales, maybe a century or two. But however long it was, he saw that the dory had not drifted out much from the shore lights, and that now, as he pulled steadily on the oars, the lights really were coming closer. Even though he was as hungry and thirsty as he had been before the whales, he was not at all as tired. The pull of the water against his arms and back thrilled him, as he felt the dory moving through the lowering swells, sensed the bow, cutting quickly and truly back up into the new meadows with a new tide. But the whales were gone. Soon the lights were much larger, and sometimes they blinked out as though someone had walked past a window for a moment. He wasn't quite sure if he would hit Baldhead right on, or if he could find the mouth of the new meadows and row up to Malaga itself. But he decided he would take the first landfall he could find, beach the dory, and go for help. His arms felt strong. There was no panic in him. He had looked into the eye of a whale.